My name is Walter Walt Monroe. I'm 69 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. When my daughter forgot to hang up the call and heard herself say he has to go to a nursing home, something inside me snapped. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I sat very still, the last of the meatloaf sliding down my fork, Ellen's picture on the mantel, reflecting the kitchen light. I listened to them plan their future like they were planning a vacation. Excited, businesslike, sure that the life I'd built with her mother was now an asset to be liquidated. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. They were talking about selling my house for nearly $1 million. They were already measuring how much of that windfall would go toward their dream, and how much would be left to fund the life they wanted, without me in it. I remember hearing Claire laugh, the sound like a blade. With Denver's market, we could get 900, maybe more, she said. Mark, her husband, agreed. We'll find a great assisted living place for him, not anything expensive, and we can finally move to Boulder. They didn't say please. They didn't say we love you. They said logistics. Ellen had loved this house. She and I had poured sweat into the floors, sheetrocked the walls, saved and scrimped, taken a second job when tuition loomed, learned how to patch a roof and lay tile, how to coax life out of a backyard the way other people coaxed music from pianos. The wood in the kitchen wore the smudges of tiny hands. The stair banister was smoothed by every hand that had clung to it over the years. I could still see Claire's kindergarten smudges in the corner of the pantry, where she'd smeared grape jam on the paint. The phone clattered from my lap and struck the hardwood with the sound of glass. For the first time since Ellen left, the house felt like something under threat, not from time or weather, but from the people who were supposed to cherish it most. I walked through the house that night like a stranger in my own memory. I touched the granite in the kitchen, the slab Ellen had insisted on, because if we're going to do it, let's do it right. I climbed the stairs slowly and paused at the door of Claire's old bedroom, still painted the soft yellow she'd begged for at 10. Her pictures still hung there, frozen in years I could not reclaim. Her dollhouse, the miniature replica of this very house I'd built in secret in the garage, sat on a shelf, dust motes dancing over the careful little curtains Ellen had stitched. It would be there soon. They already counted it as exchangeable currency for their freedom. The next morning, I found the folder where Ellen and I stashed decades of receipts and legal paper. I ran my thumb along the edges until I found the deed, the notarized warranty document that read, in blunt legal language, our names and the date the house was purchased. She and I, not someone else. After Ellen passed, the title had transferred solely to me. That's how it was meant to be, and how we'd planned the years before the cancer took her. No loans, no co-signers, no caveats. This house belonged to me. And if it belonged to me, then the decision about its future wouldn't be theirs to make. I walked to the drawer where I kept Todd Fisher's card, the attorney Ellen had insisted we see once, to just make sure everything was tidy. Todd had been good with words and patient with us. He told me, you get your affairs in order not because you expect anything bad, Roy, sorry, Walt, but because peace of mind is worth the trouble. I'd never use Todd again, but that was about to change, because I was not the sort of man who handed his life away without a fight. I wasn't a burden, not to myself, and not to the memory of the woman I loved. I'd built things for 40 years. I'd fixed leaks, framed roofs, installed hardwood, settled arguments at job sites with a handshake and a plan. I knew how to pull apart a problem and put it back together better. They assumed smaller things about me now. That assumption was going to cost them everything they expected. That night, after Claire and Mark had finished their conference dinners and glossy cocktails and fallen asleep in their hotel room, probably congratulating each other on how cleverly they'd planned their exit, I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote. Not an angry letter. Not a cold letter either. Something that contained the whole truth in the smallest, most efficient lines possible. I thought of a way Ellen used to tell me to write clearly when I fussed over instructions for workers. Clear, precise, impossible to misinterpret. Dear Claire and Mark, I wrote in my careful hand. The one Ellen had always admired. If you're reading this, it means the keys you expect no longer fit the front door. I heard what you said on the phone. I heard you discussing assisted living and a sale. You planned how much you would get and how you would spend it. I have sold the house for $890,000. The proceeds are secure. I have moved into a place where I am welcome, not tolerated. Your belongings have been packed and stored at Magnolia Moving and Storage. You have 30 days to claim your things. Love, Dad. It took me longer than I thought. The stripping away of 30 years of habit and flickers of regret. I packed the jewelry box Ellen had left, her book with the corner folded back on page 247. I put my certificates, the blueprints and old estimates, the photo of Ellen in the hard hat, lemonade in hand, pregnant with Claire, all the evidence of the life we had built. I left the furniture. I left the ornaments and the photo albums that held the past like brittle leaves. Some things stayed because the new owners would need to make the house their own. I only took what I could carry unembarrassed, the small things that fit in a suitcase and in a heart. I made calls. I called Todd. I called a real estate agent who'd come highly recommended in our neighborhood, someone who understood how to move houses that weren't just structures, but stories. I called a bank and opened an account in my name capable of holding what the sale would bring. I arranged storage. I booked an apartment in a comfortable retirement community downtown with a garden and a small library. Not a prison, I thought, but a place with people who smoked their own cigarettes and told real stories. It would be enough. They assumed I'd be surprised. They assumed I'd be grateful. But here's the thing. I wasn't grateful for betrayal. I was grateful for the clarity that comes with seeing a truth in full light. The agent, a man named Brian Whitaker, arrived that same afternoon. He walked through the house with the kind of respect I felt again for the first time in months. He commented on the oak floors, the careful joinery, the way the breakfast nook caught the morning. When I told him I wanted the sale executed quickly and discreetly, his eyes shone like a man who understood both the mechanics and the etiquette of such transactions. You could move this in a week if you needed to, Walt, he told me. With a cash buyer, nothing to slow it down. We get top dollar in this neighborhood. People will fight for a place like this. Make it happen, I said. There it was, the practical language of the business world. No shame, no melodrama. Just procedure. That night, I slept with my suitcase half-packed and the folded letter on the kitchen counter. Ellen's lavender still lingered in the linen closet. The house hummed back its memory in the quiet. I woke early and drove to Brian's office, where contracts waited. He promised discretion. He promised cash buyers and a tight closing timeline. We signed. I felt both the weight and relief of a decision made. Over the next few days, the house moved through inspections and appraisals, as if it were a patient in a hospital getting the tests required before discharge. The investors who toured it told me the kind of praise that made a man like me proud. Solid bones, good workmanship, great layout. One of them even frowned at the graceful curve of the bay window and asked who had installed it. I did, I replied quietly, and watched the surprise cross his face. It felt good to own that moment. Meanwhile, Claire and Mark lived on in their conference world, unaware that the narrative they'd written for me was being rewritten. They had bought plane tickets that took them home on Friday. My closing was scheduled for Friday morning. The timing was precise by intention. The night before they were due back, I drove to the bank at a slow, steady pace and watched the balance move from one ledger to another. The figures on the screen were real, substantial in a way I'd never imagined sitting in a kitchen where the bills used to be folded like small promises. It was money enough to keep me safe. It was money that belonged to me. I slept that night with a sense of quiet purpose, so different from the hot fury of the phone call. The plan was not revenge for revenge's sake. It was an insistence on dignity. I would not be moved like cheap furniture. I would not allow my life's work to be traded for someone else's comfort. If they wanted the freedom they'd been buying with my goodwill, then let them earn it honestly, or not at all. On Friday morning, the closing moved with clean gestures and efficient signatures. A notary watched me sign a series of papers with that engineer's carefulness I'd been born with. For the first time since Ellen died, I felt that weight lift, a luxury of agency that felt like oxygen. The sale closed. The wire confirmed. The house, the place that had held our first Christmas and our worst storms, was now the property of people who had not built it but would build memories there for themselves. I didn't gloat. I simply took a breath, placed Ellen's photo in my pocket like a talisman, and made the moves I had planned. Locks changed, a suitcase packed with our life in miniature, storage paid for, and the notes secured to the front door where none of their keys would make a difference. When the plane banked over the clouds and the couple eased back into the rhythm of home, they had no idea what the evening held. They arrived smiling, expecting the small domestic ceremony of their careful, grateful father stepping into a new plan. Instead, their keys refused the lock. The front door held the printed paper in my precise handwriting. The sound that came from Claire then, I'll never forget it, was a high, ragged thing that turned to something darker. It was the sound of entitlement colliding with the reality of consequence. That first moment when her voice broke was not the end. It was only the beginning. Claire's scream echoed through the quiet Raleigh neighborhood like a siren ripping through a peaceful evening. I watched it all happen from my small apartment 2 miles away, sitting in a modest armchair with my phone propped against a coffee mug, the miniature surveillance camera streaming every moment straight to my screen. Mark stood frozen behind her, the suitcases still in his hands. His face went pale, then a shade of red I'd never quite seen on him before. The red of a man who just watched his financial future collapse on the doorstep he thought he owned. What is this?" Claire whispered, though her voice trembled so badly the words barely formed. She ran her fingers over the envelope taped to the door like it was some sort of bomb. Mark grabbed it from her. "Open it," he demanded, tension cracking through every syllable. Claire peeled the flap with frantic, jerky motions. My careful handwriting stared back at her, calm, even unmistakably mine. I watched her eyes widen as she read the first line. Then the next. Then the final sentence. Her knees buckled, and she dropped onto the porch like someone had knocked the wind out of her. Mark crouched next to her, reading over her shoulder. "He sold it," Claire whispered, stunned, the page shaking between her fingers. "He actually sold it. He moved out," Mark said, voice flat and disbelieving. "He took the money. All of it." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same couple who wanted to ship me off to a resort with medical staff, without my say-so, were now discovering that I had made certain choices first. "I don't understand," Claire cried, pressing the paper to her chest like it might rewrite itself if she held it close enough. "Why would he do this to us?" Mark snapped. "Do this to us?" "Claire, we told him he's a burden. You practically mapped out how we'd spend the money. What did you expect him to do? Sit around and wait to be thrown into a home?" Claire turned toward him, eyes blazing. "You're the one who insisted. He forgot to turn off the stove." Mark hissed. "He could burn the house down." "Our house," Claire shouted. "Correction," Mark said bitterly. "His house, which he sold, for almost $1 million, without telling us." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire broke into sobs that were loud enough to rouse the neighbors. She wasn't crying out of hurt. She was crying out of loss. Financial loss. Watching her fall apart felt like watching the truth crack open. Mark stood and began pacing the porch in tight circles. "We need to call someone. A lawyer. The police. Someone." "They can't do anything," Claire choked out. "He said it. It's his house. His name is on everything. There's nothing illegal about him selling his own property." "Well, there has to be something," Mark snapped, his voice losing the last shred of control. "We moved in. We're family. He owes us," Claire yelled. I felt something old and tired inside me finally burn itself out. The illusion that Claire understood gratitude. The hope that Mark had a decent bone in his body. The fantasy that blood guaranteed loyalty. I raised the volume on my phone just as the argument grew sharper. "We have nowhere to go," Claire whimpered. "Our lease is up in a week, Mark. We were counting on this. We were counting on the house. You said." "I said what?" Mark cut her off. "That your dad was easy to manipulate? That he'd never fight back? That he'd be grateful we were taking care of him?" The way he said taking care, the sarcasm, the contempt, made the hair on my arms stand up. Claire shoved her hair back, fiercely. He's old, Mark. He wasn't supposed to do something like this. Well, he did, Mark barked. So now what? Silence stretched as they stared at each other, neither wanting to admit what this meant. Their carefully built expectations, the Boulder house, the new life, the $1,000,000 cushion, all gone in a single pen stroke they never saw coming. I want my father, Claire whispered, voice cracking. I want him to explain. Mark's face twisted. Explain what? That he's finally thinking for himself? That he outplayed us? That he saw right through our plan? He must have misunderstood, Claire insisted weakly. I didn't mean it. I didn't know he heard. She did. And she meant every word. Mark grabbed the note again, scanning it like he could decode a loophole. He says your stuff is in storage. He even put the address. Claire's tears stopped instantly, rage snapping back into her features. Storage? He put our belongings in a storage unit. Mark's jaw clenched. He planned this. This wasn't some impulse move. He waited for us to leave town. Then he did all of this behind our backs. My phone buzzed again, motion alert. They were inside the house now. The camera caught them stepping into the empty living room where echoes replaced furniture. Claire spun in circles, taking in the stripped walls and bare floors. He took everything important, she said breathlessly. All of Mom's things. The jewelry box. The pictures. My childhood stuff. And he left us nothing, Mark added coldly. Nothing except this note. The shock on their faces shifted into something else, a sort of terrified realization that they had pushed too hard, too fast. I leaned back in my chair and watched the two people who called me a burden now look at each other with the uneasy recognition that they had created their own disaster. Mark rubbed his temples. Okay, we'll figure this out. We just need to find him. He didn't leave any contact information. Claire cried. He just says he moved somewhere he's appreciated. What does that even mean? Who appreciates him? I smiled faintly. People did. People always had. They just weren't her. Mark slammed his hand on the kitchen counter like a man trying to intimidate someone who wasn't in the room. He had no right to do this. He had every right, Claire whispered, staring numbly at the empty space where the family photos once hung. It was his house. And now it's gone. Mark snapped. And so is our future. The irony was almost too rich. I didn't turn off the camera feed. I watched until Claire sank onto the empty floor, until Mark punched the air in helpless frustration, until they both really realized, that they weren't in control anymore. That's when Claire pulled out her phone. I'm calling him, she said, voice shaky. He won't pick up, Mark warned. I don't care. She dialed my old landline. The disconnected number message rang through the empty house like a funeral bell. Then she dialed my cell. Except I never owned one. He doesn't have a phone, Claire whispered. Mark exhaled hard. Then he doesn't want to be found. For the first time, Claire believed it. I watched them sit together in the house they once felt entitled to, stunned, scared, suddenly directionless. And I let the quiet close around them. This was only the beginning. I didn't check the camera feed again until almost 10 that night. I'd spent the evening settling into my new apartment, organizing the few clothes I'd brought, placing Ellen's jewelry box on the dresser, setting her photo beside the bed. I made a cup of tea and walked the quiet halls of the senior community, listening to distant televisions and soft laughter drifting from the card room. No one here saw me as a burden. They saw me as a man starting over. When I finally sat back down and reopened the camera app, the empty echo of my old living room told me Claire and Mark had left for the night. The front door remained ajar in the frame, leading to the blank interior where their raised voices had reverberated earlier. But they weren't gone. Not completely. There was a voicemail on my new bank-issued cell phone, the one I'd gotten only to handle account alerts and emergencies. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice wasn't. Dad, it's me. Claire's breath quivered between words. Please call me back. We don't understand what happened. Just tell us where you are. We can fix this. We'll make everything right. Just come home, okay? Please? I love you. Her voice cracked on that last word like she wasn't sure she meant it. But the message was wrong. Not the facts, the tone. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she regretted what she'd done. She said we can fix this. Meaning, put things back the way they benefit me. I didn't delete the voicemail. I just saved it. Proof that her remorse started only when the consequences landed. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaking across my new apartment. It wasn't home, not yet, but it felt clean, light, and free of the heaviness that had settled in my old house for years. I made coffee using the small machine the apartment came with and carried it to the tiny balcony, watching the trees shift in a breeze. For the first time since Ellen's funeral, I felt calm. I dressed, grabbed my notebook, and headed to the community center where retirees gathered for morning coffee and conversation. A man named Henry waved me over to a round table by the window. "You're the new guy, right?" he asked. "Walt." "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "Moved in a few days ago." "Well, welcome to the only place in Raleigh where nobody cares how old you are unless you're beating them at bingo." A few others chuckled. It was warm, easy. Nothing like the strange civility that had existed between me and Claire for years. For an hour, I listened to stories about grandchildren, fishing trips, and knee surgeries. No one asked me about my daughter. No one implied I was failing. No one checked my memory or suggested I might forget to turn off the stove. They just talked to me. Like a person. Like a peer. It felt like oxygen. Claire didn't call again until early that afternoon. This time, her voice was frantic, almost unrecognizable. "Dad, please. We went to every neighbor. No one knows where you are. Why didn't you tell us you were selling the house? Why didn't you say something? I'm scared. I'm scared something happened to you. I'm scared you're..." She stopped to inhale sharply. "Just call me, okay? Please. I need to know you're all right." The second voicemail remained just as incomplete as the first. Still no apology. Still no acknowledgement. Still no accountability. It wasn't guilt she was feeling. It was fear of what they had lost, or what they might be losing in the future. I didn't respond. That evening, I drove to the storage facility on Northside Drive, Magnolia Storage, the place where I'd moved all of Claire and Mark's belongings. The manager, a round man with a shaved head named Danny, greeted me warmly. "Mr. Monroe, I've got you all set. Unit 317, climate controlled. Their things are locked and secure. No one gets in without your permission." "Good," I said. "They'll be coming for their stuff soon. You want me to call you when they show up?" "Yes," I said. "Please." Danny nodded. "I'll make sure I'm on shift." Walking down the hallway to the storage unit, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I unlocked the door and looked at the containers, boxes stacked neatly, suitcases arranged by size, the furniture wrapped in protective sheets. It was everything that mattered to Claire. Everything she valued more than me. I closed the door and locked it. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. When I returned to the apartment, I found a third voicemail waiting. This one was from Mark. "Walt, you need to call us back immediately. This isn't a game. You can't just disappear. We need to discuss what you did. You can't just sell the house out from under us." He stopped abruptly, the irony apparently hitting him too late. "Call us back." Short, sharp, no affection. He'd been the driving force behind all of it. I'd always known it. Claire wasn't manipulative by nature. She was weak to influence, easily swayed, too eager to please, too desperate to maintain the image of a perfect life. Mark had fed those weaknesses until she lost sight of right and wrong. But hearing him speak like I had to answer him, like I owed him something, stirred something old and bitter in me. Ellen's voice whispered in my memory, "Don't give her so much that she forgets to be grateful." I had, for years. And that generosity had become a blindfold. Not anymore. Friday evening approached, the day the new owners were scheduled to begin moving things in. I knew Claire and Mark wouldn't accept what had happened until they were physically forced out. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. Sure enough, Within minutes, I saw Mark's SUV pull into the driveway. Claire climbed out first, wearing a look that mixed desperation and denial. She headed straight to the door with a fresh copy of her key, trying it again and again. Mark followed, behind with a clipboard, probably some list of grievances or demands he thought he'd level once he found me. They stepped inside, anger in every movement, scanning the place as if some mistake had been made. Then a voice came from behind them. "Can I help you?" It was the new homeowner, a young woman named Hannah, early 30s, and her husband, Nate. Claire whirled around. "What are you doing in our house?" "This isn't your house," Hannah said gently. "We closed this morning. The deed was transferred." "You're lying," Mark spat. "Where's Walt?" "He can't sell." "He did," Hannah said calmly. "Legally. Everything was filed." I watched the confrontation unfold from my small apartment, their panic sharpening into disbelief. "But we live here," Claire choked out. "No," Hannah corrected, "you used to live here. He moved your belongings to a storage unit. We have the address if you need it." Mark stared at the couple, jaw flexing, chest heaving. He wasn't angry at them. He was angry at being outplayed by an old man he underestimated. "You need to leave," Nate added, firm but polite. "This is our home now." The moment the words settled, the denial finally cracked. Claire burst into tears, loud, gasping sobs that echoed through the empty space. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door as though unwilling to let the strangers witness their defeat. I watched them step out onto the porch, utterly undone. Claire collapsed onto the steps, crying into her hands. Mark paced in tight circles, muttering to himself, ripping at his hair. Nothing they could say or do would undo what they'd done. For the first time, they realized it. I turned off the feed and let the silence settle around me. This was justice, not revenge. This was consequence, not cruelty. But the real reckoning was still coming. Because you can't plan to discard someone you love without losing something you didn't realize you still needed. The morning after Claire and Mark were forced out of my old house, I woke before sunrise. Not because of nerves I felt strangely rested, but because old habits don't die easily. For 40 years, my internal clock woke me at dawn. Even in a strange new apartment, that rhythm remained. I brewed coffee and stepped onto my small balcony, watching the first orange thread of daylight glide over the Raleigh treetops. The air smelled of early summer, dew on the asphalt, faint magnolia blossoms, and distant traffic humming to life. My phone sat on the balcony table, dark except for a single notification light. Another voicemail. I didn't listen to it immediately. I let the cup warm my hands while the sun slipped higher. I already knew what kind of message it would be. Eventually, I tapped play. "Dad, please." Claire's voice cracked immediately. We went to the storage place. The guy wouldn't let us in. He said the account isn't in our name. He said you requested that only you can approve access. Why would you do that? A shaky breath. "Where are you? We just need to talk to you. I promise we're not upset. I promise we can fix this." There it was again. We can fix this. Meaning, asterisk, fix our future. Fix our loss. Fix everything except ourselves. Asterisk. "I'm worried about you," she continued. "I don't understand why you ran away. I don't understand why you're doing this." Her voice faltered. She whispered the last part. "I'm your daughter, Dad. Aren't I?" The message ended abruptly. I stared at the phone, feeling complicated. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Just steady. She was my daughter. But she wasn't my ally. Not anymore. That afternoon, I visited the community garden behind the senior center. A handful of residents were tending tomatoes, squash, and bell peppers. The sun cast dappled shadows through tall pines while birds darted between the fence posts. Henry waved me over again. "Got something you want to plant? We could use a guy with your skills." I smiled. I built gardens for years. Might be nice to get my hands in the dirt again. "Good," he said, pointing to an empty plot. "This one's yours if you want it." I knelt beside the soil, digging my fingers into the earth. Something warm, almost painful, settled in my chest. Ellen had always said gardening was therapy. For the first time in years, I understood what she meant. Working quietly, planting seedlings someone had left behind, I felt my pulse slow. This was peace. This was recovery. I chose it. Not because I needed to hide, but because I deserved quiet after decades of giving. Still, even here, even with sunlight on my hands, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Claire wouldn't let this go. Mark definitely wouldn't. They would search. They would push. They would try everything except taking responsibility. I wiped my hands and stood, glancing toward the community center. For the first time, I wondered how far they were willing to go. My answer arrived that evening. I returned to my apartment, set my keys on the table, and started boiling water for tea. My phone vibrated again. Not a voicemail this time. A text from an unknown number. Dad, please talk to us. This is Claire. I'm worried about you. Asterisk, asterisk. A second message appeared before I finished reading the first. Just tell us where you are. That's all we need. Asterisk, asterisk. I stared at the screen. Another message came through seconds later. Mark says we should ask your doctor if you're confused or unstable. He thinks something might be wrong. Please just call. Asterisk, asterisk. Unstable. Confused. They were already rewriting the story in their favor, so the world would see them as the concerned children, and me as the man who irrationally abandoned them. Mark had always been clever in that way, manipulating the narrative to protect his image. I responded with a single line. I'm safe. I'm where I choose to be. Asterisk, asterisk. 3 dots appeared instantly as Claire typed back. Where is that? I didn't answer. The dots disappeared. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Not Claire. Not Mark. A number I didn't recognize, but with a Raleigh local area code. I let it ring twice before picking up. Hello. A woman's voice replied, clipped, professional, overly sweet. Mr. Monroe? This is Julie Reynolds from the Raleigh County Adult Protective Services Division. We've received a call expressing concern for your well-being. We were told you may be in danger or unable to care for yourself. We'd like to verify your safety. I closed my eyes. Mark. He'd escalated. Mr. Monroe, she repeated. Are you all right? I took a breath and opened my eyes slowly, grounding myself. Yes, I said calmly. I'm perfectly fine. We just had a few routine questions. I don't need an evaluation, I said. And I don't need oversight. I'm living independently. I can provide proof of residence and funds if necessary. The woman hesitated. Well, that's good to hear. But since a concern was filed. Is this mandatory? I asked, voice steady. No, she admitted. Not unless we believe you're incapable of caring for yourself. I exhaled. Then there's nothing more to discuss. Another pause. If you ever feel unsafe or pressured, we're here to help. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Thank you. Have a good evening. I hung up. My hands tightened reflexively around the phone. Mark had tried to use the system to corner me, to force a welfare check, to paint me as unstable so he could regain control. That was no longer concern. That was desperation. I stood in the quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My apartment felt both small and strong, like a fortress built not of stone, but of choice. I walked to the window, looking out over the parking lot lit by tall lamps, the world unchanged by the small storm in my chest. They weren't done, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I visited the storage facility again to check on Claire and Mark's belongings. Danny greeted me with his usual grin. Got some movement on your unit today, he said. Couple came by. Woman was crying. Man was angry. Wanted me to let them in. And I asked. I told them the truth. They're not on the account. Can't release anything without your authorization. Did they say anything? Danny snorted. Plenty. The guy threatened to sue me, the company, you, the whole state of North Carolina. Said you stole his future. I shook my head. Stole his future. Amazing how people twist the story when the consequences land on their doorstep. What about her? I asked quietly. Danny's expression softened. She just kept asking why you did it. I sighed. Did they leave peacefully? Eventually. They said they'd be back. I nodded. Of course they would. Because people who expect something from you don't go quiet when they don't get it. They get louder. That evening, Claire called again. Her voice was small. Frayed. Dad, please. Please talk to me. Just once. Tell me what you need. Tell me how to make this right. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have never said those things. Not I love you. Just fix this. I set the phone down carefully. If I picked up now, she'd cry. She'd beg. She'd play the daughter she thought I remembered. The child who used to run through sprinklers and ask for bedtime stories. Except that child grew into a woman who called her father a burden. No amount of tears could erase a truth spoken with confidence. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at Ellen's picture. I'm doing the best I can, I whispered. I hope you'd understand. The apartment was quiet for a long time. Then, a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Not a neighbor. Not a friend. Someone determined. Someone who found me. My heart slowed to a steady, prepared beat. I stood, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. My breath caught. Claire. Eyes red. Face swollen. Hands shaking. She had tracked me down. And this was the moment everything would break open. Or finally mend. I turned the lock. And opened the door. I opened the door slowly, only halfway, letting the chain latch stretch to its limit. I wasn't ready to give full access. Not yet. Not until I saw her eyes. Claire stood there on the landing, shoulders trembling, hair frizzy from humidity, makeup smeared as if she'd rubbed her face with the back of her hand again and again. Her breath hitched when she saw me. Dad. Just my name. No accusations. No rehearsed lines. For a moment, a brief, painful flash, she looked like the girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while we watched old movies. The girl who giggled when I tickled her feet. The girl who whispered, Daddy, don't leave my room yet. But then the rest of her flooded back. The adult Claire. The Claire who forgot to hang up the phone. The Claire who called me a burden. The Claire who planned to sell my life while I still lived it. I slid off the chain and opened the door wider. What are you doing here? I asked softly. She stepped forward instinctively, but stopped when she saw my stance. Firm, not inviting. I needed to see you, she whispered. You won't call me back. You won't answer anything. I didn't know if you were alive. I finished. Her chin trembled. Safe. You filed a welfare check on me. She hesitated. I didn't. That was Mark. I know. She closed her eyes, as if that admission hurt. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped back, just one pace, enough to let her enter. She walked in slowly, looking around at my tiny apartment. The basic furniture, the small kitchen, Ellen's picture on the nightstand. Her face twisted. This is where you're living now? She asked, voice small. Yes. Dad, this place is... She looked around again. It's so simple. I offered. Too small, she said. You deserve better. I nodded. I do. She flinched. It was the first honest thing I'd told her in years. She sat on the edge of the plain sofa, hands twisting together in her lap. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know you'd do something like this. You didn't know I'd take control of my own life. I asked. No, I thought, she hesitated. I thought you needed us. I did, I said. For a long time. And I thought you needed me, too. But somewhere along the way, that became an inconvenience for you. Her eyes filled with tears again. I didn't mean what I said on the phone. You meant every word, I said quietly. That's why it hurt. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Dad, the nursing home, we didn't mean it like that. You meant it exactly like that. I heard you making plans. I heard you discussing the money. I heard how excited you were about selling the house Ellen and I built. She swallowed hard. I thought you were losing your independence. And you never once asked me if that was true. She looked down at her hands. We panicked, she whispered. Mark said, this is not about your husband. I cut in. This is about you. My daughter. The girl I raised. The girl I worked myself ragged for. The girl I sacrificed every comfort for. She sobbed openly then. I know. I know you did. You forgot, I said, voice steady. You forgot all of it. You forgot what it took to keep a roof over your head. You forgot what your mother went through. You forgot what I taught you about responsibility. I didn't forget, she cried. I just lost perspective. No, I said gently. You lost gratitude. She covered her face with both hands, breaking down completely. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Just her quiet crying and my steady breathing. Two people sitting in the wreckage of a broken trust. When she finally composed herself, she looked up at me, eyes swollen, voice raw. Dad, what do you want from me? Tell me what to do to fix this. The question lingered between us, heavy and desperate. I sat down across from her, hands folded. Claire, I said, you can't fix this with words. Or money. Or apologies. This isn't about the house. Or the storage unit. Or what you lost. She swallowed hard. Then what is it about?